Hello, guys, and welcome back to the MD Investor channel where we talk about personal finance, we talk about debt, all these financial stuff. But the topic today is basically what's been going on in Minneapolis and all over the major cities in the U.S. over the last 8 days. The murder by police on video of George Floyd. Um, so today's going to be a little different. I came across a CNN article that I thought was pretty interesting. Not just the fact that it's covering the story that, of his murder and all this, but it kind of dug a little deeper. And then we're going to get into another article written by a New York Times columnist, which kind of gets to the history of the racial inequalities. So here it says, we're going to go through this. It said the nationwide protest following the death of a black man, George Floyd, at the hands of white police officers, has once again shown a spotlight on the long-standing racial divide in the U.S. This, along with the coronavirus pandemic that we're still going through, has disproportionately killed black Americans, has drawn renewed attention to the persistent inequities in wealth, health, and opportunity between blacks and whites despite economic prosperity of recent years. Those disparities exist because of a long history of policies that excluded and exploited black Americans, said Valerie Wilson, director of the program on race, ethnicity, and the economy at the Economic Policy Institute, a left-leaning group. So basically what she's saying is that this has been going on for a while. It says a long history. Those disparities exist because of a long history of policies that excluded and exploited black Americans. So you let that sink in for a while. Long history. Many of us, as long as we can remember, we've always known that most blacks are poor. We come from poverty. Why is that? And that's kind of what we're going to get into today. Racial inequality has become so normalized in this society, she said. It's what we expect to see. That's the way it's been for so long. Now think about it, right? It is so common for us to hear the NFL player coming out of poverty. Now he wants to buy a house for his mom. The NBA player come from poverty, wants to buy a house for. But why is that? Before we get into the different staggering numbers, let's go to the foundation of this. And this is a great article in the New York Times by Tremaine Lee, written last August in 2019. A vast wealth gap driven by segregation, redlining, evictions, and exclusions separates black and white America. Let us go through this, and we're all going to learn something because I know I did. Elmore Bowling, whose brothers called him Buddy, was a kind of a one-man economy in Lowndersboro, Alabama. He leased a plantation where he had a general store with a gas station out front and a catering business. He grew cotton, corn, and sugarcane. He also owned a small fleet of trucks that ran livestock and made deliveries between Lowndersboro and Montgomery. At his peak, Bowling employed as many as 40 people, all of them black like him. Right? Just by reading it, you're thinking, oh, this man is successful. He got to be white. But he's black, right? And he employed 40 black people, right? Small business. One December day in 1947, a group of white men showed up along a stretch of Highway 80 just yards from Bowling's home and store where he lived with his wife, Bertha May, and their 7 young children. The men confronted him on a section of road he had helped lay. So he basically helped lay this section of road, and they shot him 7 times. 6 times with a pistol and once with a shotgun blast to the back. His family rushed from the store to find him laying dead in a ditch. Can you imagine? It brings about so much memories, right? Deep South, Emmett Till, and all these names, right? And even to our current day. The shooters didn't even cover their faces. They didn't need to. Everyone knew who had done it and why. Quote unquote, he was too successful to be a Negro. Someone who knew Bowling told a newspaper at the time, right? They killed him because he was too successful to be a Negro, to be a black man. He was too successful. He had too much wealth. When Bowling was killed, his family estimated he had as much as $40,000 in the bank and more than $5,000 in assets, about $500,000 in today's dollars. But within months of his murder, nearly all of it would be gone. That's what we're going to get into, guys, to realize why are we in the situation that we're in right now. See, he had money, he had wealth, he had assets, but within months of his murder, nearly all of it would be gone. White creditors and people posing as creditors took the money family got from the sale of their trucks and cattle. They even staked claims on what was left of the family's savings. The job that he provided were gone too. Almost overnight, the Bowlings went from prosperity to poverty. See that? Almost overnight, they went from prosperity to poverty. Bertha May found work at a dry cleaner. So imagine that. She was a wife and pretty much a wealthy man, a self-made man. He had a small business. He had wealth. He had assets. And now they basically employed 40 people. And now she has to go work at a dry cleaner. The older children dropped out of school to help support the family. Within 2 years, the Bowlings fled Lowndes County, fearing for their lives. Wow. So this, let me add this. This is part of the 1619 Project. It's an ongoing initiative through the New York Times that began August of last year, the 400th anniversary of the beginning of slavery. And they basically want to kind of tell the truth, find a reason for, why are things the way they are. The period that followed the Civil War was one of economic terror and wealth stripping. Economic terror and wealth stripping that has left black people at lasting economic disadvantage. See that? This is what happened after the Civil War. Yeah, you got your freedom, but they're going to strip everything from you that makes life worth living. All of your wealth, they're going to strip it from you. White Americans have 7 times the wealth of black Americans on average. We're going to get into that. White Americans have 7 times the wealth of black Americans on average. Why is that? Though black people make up nearly 13% of the U.S. population, they hold less than 3% of the nation's total wealth. The median family wealth for white people is $171,000, compared to just $17,600 for black people. About a tenth. Okay, so the median family wealth of the white people is it's basically 10 times greater than the median family wealth of white people. Why is that? It is worse on the margins. Let's move on down. Today's racial wealth gap is perhaps the most glaring legacy of American slavery and the violent economic disposition that followed. So they're saying that the wealth gap we see today is basically a glaring legacy of American slavery and the violent economic disposition that followed. Meaning it's not a coincidence, it's not an accident, right? This is just the end result of the consequences of programs and inequalities and policies that were started a long time ago. The fate suffered by Elmore Bowling and his family was not unique to them or to Jim Crow, Alabama. It was part of a much broader social and political campaign. So that much broader social and political campaign. When legal slavery ended in 1865, there was great hope for the formerly enslaved people. Between 1865 and 1870, the Reconstruction Amendments established birthright citizenship, making all black people citizens and granting them equal protection under the law. Right before that, they were slaves. Then they were considered what I think 1/3 of a man. But now, right, they said between when legal slavery ended in 1865, there was great hope for the formerly enslaved people. They're now free, right? Between 1865 and 1870, the Reconstruction Amendment established birthright citizenship, making all black people citizens and granting them equal protection under the law, and gave black men the right to vote. There was also the promise of compensation, right? Now we're talking about reparation, right? That's the new thing, reparation. There was also the promise of compensation. In January 1865, General William Sherman issued an order reallocating hundreds of thousands of acres of white-owned land along the coast of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina for settlement by black families in 40-acre plots. That's where it came, 40 acres and a mule, right? That's what was promised. Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau to oversee the transition from slavery to freedom. and the Freedmen's Savings Bank was formed to help 4 million formerly enslaved people gain financial freedom, right? So this whole process and system was set up. They were going to give them 40 acres and a mule. Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau, right, to help with the transition from slavery to freedom. The Freedmen's Bank was formed to help these 4 million formerly enslaved people gain financial freedom. Well, let's see what happened. When Lincoln was assassinated, Vice President Andrew Johnson effectively rescinded Sherman's order by pardoning white plantation owners and returning to them the land on which 40,000 or so black families had settled. So basically, the promise was made by General Sherman. Lincoln was assassinated, and President Andrew Johnson basically rescinded it, saying, okay, we're taking it back. Quote unquote, he said, President Andrew Johnson, this is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I'm president, it will be a government for white men, Johnson declared in 1866, basically a year after the Civil War. The Freedmen's Bureau, always meant to be temporary, was dismantled in 1872. More than 60,000 black people deposited more than $1 million into the Freedmen's Savings Bank. But its all-white trustees began issuing speculative loans to white investors and corporations, and when it failed in 1874, many black depositors lost much of their savings, right? So what was meant to be a transition from slavery to freedom and financial independence was used just for speculation and basically risky business, and they lost it all. Here's a picture of Mr. Elmore Bowling and his wife Bertha May Nowden Bowling in Alabama around 1945, right? Self-made man, a positive man, small business man, doing the right thing, working hard, giving jobs to other people. And because of hatred and jealousy, they killed him, right? No Negro should be so successful. The origins of the racial wealth gap start with the failure to provide the formerly enslaved with the land grants of 40 acres, says William A. Doherty, Jr., a professor of public policy and African American studies at Duke University. See that? He said the origins of the racial wealth gap, it started with the failure to give them the 40 acres that was promised. That's why I'm talking to you now on our channel. We're talking about assets, right? He's talking about these are assets that was provided for them or that was promised to them, and it was failed to be delivered to them. He said that was the origins of the racial wealth gap. Any financial progress that black people made, was regarded as an affront to white supremacy. Why? Because if they're saying they're superior to you, and yet you're able to outwork them and become more prosperous than them, then it's an affront to their white supremacy, right? After a decade of black gains under Reconstruction, a much longer period of racial violence would wipe nearly all of it away. Again, jealousy and hatred. To assuage Southern white people, the federal government pulled out the Union troops who were stationed in the South to keep order. So the Union troops were stationed in the South to keep order, but to make the white people feel better, the federal government pulled them out. During this period of so-called redemption, lawmakers throughout the South enacted black codes and Jim Crow laws that stripped black people of many of their freedoms and property. Other white people, often aided by law enforcement, see that aided by law enforcement, and now we're talking about law enforcement taking away people's rights, often aided by law enforcement, waged a campaign of violence against black people that would rob them of an incalculable amount of wealth, right? Burning their property, burning their house, run them off the land, right? Basically racial terrorism. Armed white people stormed prosperous, majority black Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898 to murder dozens of black people, force 2,000 others off their property, and overthrow the city government. In the Red Summer of 1919, at least 240 black people were murdered across the country. And in 1921, in one of the bloodiest racial attacks in U.S. history, Greenwood, a prosperous black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was burned and looted. It is estimated that as many as 300 black people were murdered and 10,000 were rendered homeless. I think that they wrote a book about it called Black Wall Street. Got to read that. And we got to read that together. 35 square blocks were destroyed. No one was ever convicted in any of these acts of racist violence. You have limited opportunity to accumulate wealth. And then you have a process where that wealth is destroyed or taken away, Darity said. And all of that is prior to the effects of restrictive covenants, redlining, which is basically where they put basically a red over the black neighborhoods. We say we're not going to give them housing or anything like that. The discriminatory application of the GI Bill and other federal programs. The post-Reconstruction plundering of black wealth was not just a product of spontaneous violence, but etched in law and public policy. It wasn't just like, but crazy people going out. It was etched in law and public policy. Through the first half of the 20th century, the federal government actively excluded black people from government wealth-building programs. In the 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal helped build a solid middle class through sweeping social programs, including Social Security and the minimum wage. But a majority of black people at the time were agricultural laborers or domestic workers. Basically, we worked on farms, we were housemaids and so on, and butlers, occupations that were ineligible for these benefits. So we were ineligible to get the GI Bill and to go to college and to be, part of the middle class. The establishment of the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1933 helped save the collapse in housing market, but it largely excluded black neighborhoods from government-insured loans. Those neighborhoods were deemed quote-unquote hazardous and colored in with red on maps, a practice that came to be known as redlining. The GI Bill is often hailed as one of Roosevelt's most enduring legacies. It helped usher millions of working-class veterans through college and into new homes and the middle class, but it discriminatorily benefited white people. While the bill didn't explicitly exclude black veterans, the way it was administered often did. The bill gave veterans access to mortgages with no down payment, but the VA adopted the same racially restrictive policies as the Federal Housing Administration, which guaranteed bank loans only to developers who wouldn't sell to black people. The deck is stacked against you. So, we tout the GI Bill. Oh, it was great for the GIs returning home. Yeah, for the white GIs returning home, right? They said they didn't give the loan to developers if they was going to sell to black people. They would only get the loan if they would not sell to black people. So, the discriminatory loan. It was a discriminatory thing. To the extent that blacks have the capacity to accumulate wealth, we have not had the ability to transfer the same kind of resources across generations. Let me read that again. To the extent that blacks have the capacity to accumulate wealth, we have not had the ability to transfer the same kinds of resources across generations. That's why I'm always talking about breaking the cycle of generational poverty. A lot of times, when we are these first generation college students, right? They make it to college, get a good job, and they have nice vacations and homes and cars and all that stuff. But they said only a small percentage of that wealth is transferred to the next generation. They said within, I think, a generation or two, that wealth is squandered. They can't pass it on. 70 years later, the effects of Bowling's murder are still felt by his children and their children. There was no inheritance, nothing for my father passed down, because it was all taken away, says Josephine Bowling McCall, the only one of Bowling's children to get a college degree. You think if he was alive and he would have continued with everything he was doing, most of them would have got a college degree? Of course they would have. But because he died and he wasn't able to pass on his wealth, that made a significant difference on their lives. Of the 7 siblings, those with more education fared best. The men struggled most, primarily working as low-paid laborers. Of Elmore and Bertha May's 25 grandchildren, only 6 graduated from college. Of those, 2 are McCall's children. The rest are unemployed or underemployed. They have never known anything like the prosperity of their grandparents. Talking about not able to transfer the wealth across generations. Now, let's get to the racial disparities. Okay? The first one we're going to talk about is the wealth. White families have substantially more wealth than black families. We just read about it, right? That the average net worth of the average white family, and we see it again right here. The average net worth of the average white family is $171,000. Average net worth of black family, about 10% of that, $70,600, right? The median net worth of white households is about 10 times the median net worth of black households. That is staggering. Staggering. And why is that? They say a big portion of that is the fact that whites have a higher percentage of home ownership, and most of their wealth is in the house. The typical non-Hispanic black household has accumulated only about one-tenth the wealth of a typical non-Hispanic white family. That gap stemmed in part from lower rates of home ownership and smaller inheritance among blacks. This is what we're talking about, right? That gap in wealth stemmed in part from lower rates of home ownership, right? You can't pass on your apartment to your children, right? Because you don't own it. You're just renting it. And I know there's certain people that own the apartment, but I'm not talking about that. But the fact that when you're a renter, you don't have any equity. That's what we're talking about. So that gap stems in part from lower rates of home ownership and smaller inheritances among blacks. We have nothing to pass on, right? I'll talk about why, as blacks, every generation has to start from zero. Why there no wealth to pass on? Why there no inheritance to pass on? The Bible said a good man passes on an inheritance to his children's children. Let me say that again. A good man passes on an inheritance and to its children's children. So it's talking about legacy wealth. That's what we talk about on this channel. Income. Another disparity. White families typically have higher income than black families. The average white income, or the median income for the white family, 71,000. Black, 41,000. Right, about 60% of it. Right, so we're making less. We are not spending our money wisely on buying assets like homes. Right, and we don't pass on the wealth that we have. We don't pass it on. We have nothing to pass on. So every generation starts from zero. Let's look at unemployment. The unemployment rate for black Americans exceeds that of whites. The unemployment for whites is about 14.2%. Unemployment for blacks about 16.7%. One area that has improved is the gap in unemployment rates. For decades, the jobless rate for blacks was typically more than twice that of whites. But the gap narrowed to its smallest differential on record last year. That is, until the coronavirus outbreak. So basically, usually the unemployment rate is twice that of blacks compared to whites, but it had narrowed over the last decade. Poverty. Let's look at poverty. A larger share of black population lives in poverty. The poverty rate for black Americans is more than double that of whites, right? The white population that lives in poverty is 8.1%. And it's 20.8% of blacks, more than double. Okay? Why is that? Okay? And we read about how the wealth was stolen and there's nothing to pass on. But we have to take some responsibility for ourselves as well. Okay? I'm not going to let us off the hook that completely. Healthcare. We have been through and still currently going through the pandemic of the COVID-19. And we know that the black population has been hit harder due to their underlying health problems, asthma, obesity, and hypertension, and so on. A larger share of black Americans lack health insurance compared to whites, right? 5.4% of whites without insurance, and almost double, 9.7% of blacks without insurance. And we know that we were hit disproportionately with the COVID-19, right? We have 13% of the population and 23% of the COVID-19 death. So, guys, I know this is troubling time that we are going through right now, but I just thought today we would go through and look like there is history here. It has been basically almost like financial genocide has been perpetrated on us, orchestrated by the United States government. We see the racial terrorism that's been going on, and I'm just trying to bring it back here to what we're currently going on now with George Floyd. Like I said, I'm not going to totally take us off the hook. We know the system is stacked against us, right? We know the deck is stacked against us. We know that they don't like us. We know that they hate us, let's to be honest, right? We know that they see us as less than them, white supremacy, white supremacy. They think that they are better than us. We know that's not true, but that's how the system is. That's how the system is, and it's how it's been stacked up. That's how it plays out, right? We know that a large portion of your life is going to be dictated by the zip code in which you were born in. Let's be honest, right? You're born in 90210 zip code, and your life is going to be a certain way, right? That's Beverly Hills. The school system is going to be great. The hospital is going to be great. The police is going to treat you a certain way. Your life is basically set up for success. And if you are born in one of the poorest congressional districts, like in the South Bronx, the school system is poor. The teaching is poor. Everybody around you, there's drugs and alcohol and all type of stuff. And it's going to be hard for you to fight to get out of it. But I still can't let us off the hook. We got to take personal responsibility. That's one of the things we talk about in the channel. Taking personal responsibility for our finances so we can break the cycle of generational poverty, right? We talk about that, we're not taught this, right? We're not really born and set up for success. We're not inheriting anything, but we got to take personal responsibility, every man for themselves. And we got to be responsible for our family. I'm talking to the men out there. All right, you got to stand up, black man. You got to take care of your family. You got to, you got to take care of yourself. Okay, you got to leave a legacy for your family. Okay, we can't continue this nonsense over and over again. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So we know the deck has been stacked against us. We know that they don't like us. However, we're still going to succeed. With the help of God, we are still going to succeed. Okay. And there is no doubt about it. We're going to succeed. Guys, don't forget, guys, to like, subscribe, let your friends and family know, guys. That is the MD Investor, guys. Then, we basically just trying to educate ourselves, trying to teach our kids, and try to break the cycle of generational poverty. And I'll see you on the next video.